Senior military officials are drafting plans for a full troop withdrawal from Afghanistan to be delivered to President Trump's desk in the coming days. The U.S. currently has less than 10,000 troops in the country as the Pentagon continues to scale down operations as part of a February agreement signed with the Taliban. Chief Pentagon spokesperson Jonathan Hoffman responding to questions on Tuesday about what that timeline currently looks like.
Now we're moving to 8,600. That is a part of the agreement that we made with the Taliban back in, I believe, December or January. So we had 135 days. So in July, we'll reach that number. That's part of the recommendation by the commander. Any reductions under that will be conditions-based after the U.S. government assesses the security environment and the Taliban's compliance with the agreement and in coordination with our NATO allies and partners. But like I said, the best path to a lasting peace in Afghanistan is a political settlement among Afghans, and we support the efforts to get there.
One of the plans reportedly in consideration would see U.S. troop presence in the country reduced from 8,600 to almost zero by Election Day in order to fulfill the president's campaign promises. Such a move would put the U.S. ahead of schedule since the agreement calls for U.S. troops to be fully withdrawn from the country within 14 months of that deal being signed. It remains unclear if a small contingent of troops will be left behind to assist Afghan security forces in keeping the peace. President Trump warning the Taliban and other insurgents on Tuesday that the U.S. can always return to Afghanistan if they do not uphold their end of the bargain concerning counterterrorism efforts.
We're there 19 years. We're really not acting as soldiers. We're acting as police. And we're not sent over there to be policemen, but we're there 19 years. And, yeah, I think that's enough, and they understand. We're having very positive talks. We want to bring our soldiers back home. We want to bring them back home. And we're not only talking about there, we're talking about other countries also. We bring our soldiers back home. We can always go back if we have to. If we have to go back, and we'll go back raging. And then we'll go back as warriors, fighters.
As you heard both the president and the Pentagon spokesperson say earlier, the U.S. wants Western-backed governments in Kabul to step up when it comes to policing their own state. However, separate peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban have hit a series of roadblocks, as the Taliban does not recognize the authority of Kabul and instead prefers to deal directly with the U.S. In fact, an April 30th report by the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction stated that Taliban fighters have refrained from attacks against coalition and U.S. troops, but increased attacks against Afghan security forces to levels above seasonal norms. Despite the uptick in violence earlier this year, U.S. military officials say progress has been made in recent weeks to bring those two sides together. The Afghan government in Kabul this week releasing more than 900 Taliban prisoners as part of a goodwill gesture to extend the peace of a ceasefire for the religious holiday.
The release is part of a prisoner swap under a deal struck by the Taliban and the United States in February. The hope is to instigate peace talks between the Islamist militants and an Afghan delegation aiming to end the two-decade-old war. Afghanistan's National Security Advisor told a news conference that the request for a ceasefire extension was key to avoiding further bloodshed.
Meanwhile, President Trump is also trying to put out fires in other parts of the world, as China appears to be taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic. Beijing is currently building up troops on its side of the border with India, amid growing tension over patrols in the Himalayan mountains. The U.S. has long supported much of India's claims to the territories disputed by China, with President Trump tweeting today, quote, "We've informed both India and China that the United States is ready, willing, and able to mediate or arbitrate their now raging border dispute." But India is not the only place facing intense pressure from China amid the confusion over this pandemic. With Secretary of State Mike Pompeo reporting to Congress today, Hong Kong is no longer autonomous from China. Pompeo says the U.S. will continue to stand with the people of Hong Kong as China prepares to pass new national security laws later this week. The move could reverse some of the policies that allow Hong Kong to flourish as a global economic hub and allows its citizens a high degree of political and individual freedoms. President Trump is now considering sanctions for China, and Taiwan is putting together a humanitarian action plan to protect Hong Kong's democracy protesters who are now at greater risk due to these proposed laws.
Hong Kong riot police fired pepper pellets to disperse protesters in the city's central financial district Wednesday. Hundreds of protesters had taken to the streets and shopping malls as the city's legislature debated a bill that criminalises disrespect of the Chinese national anthem. Protesters see it as a move by Beijing to strip away the city's freedoms. The bill carries penalties of up to 3 years in jail and/or fines of up to $6,500 US. Last week, Beijing also proposed new national security laws, which also helped fan the flames of Hong Kong's new protests. When US President Donald Trump was asked if they will impose sanctions on China, he said,
something you're going to be hearing about before the end of the week, very powerfully, I think.
Joining us now to discuss these latest developments is Cory Mills, a decorated Army combat veteran who now serves as an advisor to the federal government on defense and national security matters. So, Cory, I want to start with China. That's something that, for a long time, China's been an aggressor in more of a soft power type of way, whether we talk about the South China Sea, whether we talk about Taiwan, Hong Kong, and now it looks like they're taking advantage of the current pandemic in order to further those goals. Is that what China's doing, and should the U.S. step up to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time that the world really sees that China has continually been an economic and cyber warfare with the United States and the world for decades now. They have, taken advantage of the pandemic times. They have certainly looked at the idea that during this pandemic they had locked down the Hong Kong protesters, but now they're going a step further. They're starting to take it to National People's Congress and essentially citing that this is a national security issue and taking away this one country, two system framework that provides certain types of freedoms to Hong Kong that, not the mainland China, that mainland China does not receive. So it's certainly an attack on pro-democracy protests.
And I even remember when the pro-democracy protests were the biggest things in the headlines. It seems like years ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. And China was putting their military right up along the coast of Hong Kong right there. Kind of, even though they weren't going to go in necessarily, it was still a threat of violence that I think was a message to the people of Hong Kong. We even see that Taiwan was raising the alarms about this pandemic very early. Maybe China's looking to take action in regard to that. But I think it's something that it's going to put a lot of emphasis on the Department of Defense, as well as the new DNI, John Ratcliffe. I think that he's going to have to really up the intelligence when it comes to what China is doing, because we're still looking into the origins of this virus. We're still looking into what China did in response to that. So what should the U.S. do in response? Is it a time for tariffs? Is it time for maybe a sit-down and more of a dialogue? What comes next?
Well, I think we've certainly looked at the various tariffs. I think that we definitely need to open up further dialogue. Look, it's kind of ironic that, as we leverage these tariffs, and the president has done a phenomenal job at trying to really balance things. For decades and for over administration, they all threatened that they were going to go ahead and rebalance the trade deficit between the two countries and failed to do so. This president has stepped forward and done something. I think John Ratcliffe is a phenomenal individual. I think great things for the DNI. I think it's time we start looking at things. They intentionally suppress where this virus originated from. It's very timely that enabling them to do on which shut down tests in Hong Kong, knowing that they're the largest manufacturers of PPE and certain types of medication, knowing that they would economically, gain some type of a benefit from this. And you're seeing plane after plane, AN 224s, you name it, leaving China and going around flying the world. Whoa, yeah. If you look at contact with the president of France, Macron, you recall that Macron had asked for PPE. And China's response to that was that we'd be happy to supply you with all the PPE that you want, so long as you allow Huawei's 5G to essentially be your country's #1 pick.
Yeah, and that's something, too, that they've been looking to exert their pressure on, whether it's Huawei, whether it's 5G technology, if it's them stealing intellectual property. I mean, there's multiple things that we could talk about, and I think the American people, too, polls show that it's ready for them to take some action when it comes to this. But I want to get your opinion on Afghanistan, too, because it looks like there's now at least a more formulated type of game plan when it comes to the U.S. troop withdrawal. It's been a slow and steady process, but it's something that President Trump has promised that he'd do dating back to 2016. It seems to be a little bit more complicated than I think a lot of people thought initially, because we have to negotiate with the Taliban. It's still weird to even say, but when it comes to that, how do you think this process is going? Is it too fast, too slow? Are you concerned that it might leave a vacuum in the Middle East?
Well, here's the thing. Our initial reasoning for going into Afghanistan was to prevent Afghanistan from being a safe haven of terrorism. And that was really the main mission. I think that mission as a whole has been accomplished. We can't compare Afghanistan to Iraq per se. Iraq has a completely different situation where we have Iran, who is technically infiltrating their politics as well as for putting in these various pro-Iranian militias. Afghanistan's problem is really domestic, and it's dealing with the Taliban itself. So I think that, whether the peace plan that Secretary Pompeo and the president has put in place works exactly as we've laid it out or not, for the first time, we actually have a strategy. And I think that people need to focus on that. We're here to try and support and ensure that, Ashraf Ghani and the leaders of Afghanistan do what is necessary within the framework to find peace. And I think that we're also seeing a ceasefire with regards to, certain holidays, which didn't take place in the past. But we also have to look broader about this, the Haqqani network and, ISIS within Afghanistan, things like this. But for me, it's really enlightening just to see that we have a strategy in place to try and determine a peace plan for America's longest war.
I think that's right, and it's something that a lot of American people are on board with, too. A lot of people know individuals who have been affected by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I think right now, the fact that we're seeing dialogue, I think that's something that's promising. I think that's how a lot of people want to end this whole process. They don't want to leave it completely empty. They know that that would mean that all the work that we did was essentially for nothing, but I think you're right to say that generally our mission has been accomplished, and I think the American people would rather see this kind of negotiated between the government in Kabul and the Taliban forces, but of course with the U.S. guiding the way. I think that's likely what we're going to see. Yeah, and before I let you go, too, do you think that that is the way that we should go about this, too? Do you think that from a military perspective that a lot of service members are on board with that as well?
Again, when it comes to the service members, we're always about one thing, which is accomplishing the mission and carrying out the objectives of our commander-in-chief and our lower commands. Mm-hmm. The reality is that, we need Pakistan to step up. They need to look at North and South Waziristan, where Haqqani network has been able to run rampant. We need that interdialogue to continue to go forth. I'm not saying that all of the U.S. and all coalition pulls. I think ISAF could still do a tremendous amount in training and supporting the Afghan army as well as for the Afghan National Police. But the reality is that the main mission, and it's even in our strategic framework, and the President Trump and Secretary Pompeo ensured that was one of the number of things in there, is that Afghanistan would agree that they would never again allow themselves to be a safe haven of terrorism. And that was our original mission.
Yeah, and it looks like that's at least the path that they're going down right now. We've seen Secretary Pompeo take a very firm stance about that. We've seen President Trump show his support for that. It seems like it is the generals in this situation that are really making the calls, which I think comes as good news for a lot of people involved. But Cory Mills, I really appreciate you coming on tonight, breaking down this issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And still ahead on After Hours, President Trump is also fighting a virtual battle with one of the largest social media platforms. Why he's accusing Twitter of interfering with the upcoming election. Right after the break.